Ever feel like startup success is this big mystery? Like everyone's chasing after the perfect product, but what they really should be mastering is navigating uncertainty.
Oh, yeah.
Hmm.
It's funny how often that comes up.
We'll get ready to unlock like a whole new level of understanding
Mm.
because we're going to deep dive into episode 47 of the Leaders Who Scale podcast and really break down their insights on leadership and like give you some seriously actionable advice for steering through all those choppy waters of startup growth.
Sounds good.
And let me tell you, this episode, it throws a real curveball right off the bat. A staggering 65% of startup failures stem from leadership issues, not product flaws, not market miscalculations, leadership issues.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge.
It's a pretty potent reality check.
Yeah, it really is. It is a striking statistic.
Mm.
It really underscores how a brilliant product, well, it alone isn't enough to like guarantee success. Yeah. Especially when you factor in the complexities of really rapid growth.
Exactly. And to really hammer that home, they actually interviewed Mark Rodriguez, the founder of TechFlow, who like experienced this firsthand.
Right.
He went from being like laser focused on product development to suddenly having to grapple with all these like team dynamics, evolving company culture, and somehow like maintaining a clear vision, all while everything around him was changing at warp speed.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a challenge.
Yeah.
And, that's such a critical point because as companies expand, the demands on leadership, they shift, and they shift dramatically. It's no longer enough to simply be good at your craft, right?
Right.
You need to inspire, you need to align, and you really need to empower your team in the middle of all this constant change. And honestly, that's where so many startups stumble.
So how do successful leaders navigate this really tricky terrain? Thankfully, leaders who scale, they don't just present the problem, they unveil a solution, this leadership blueprint that they gleaned from interviewing over 200 thriving startup founders.
Oh, wow.
And the first practice they highlight is radical transparency.
Radical transparency.
Yeah. And they don't just talk the talk, they actually showcase a company, CloudCore,
Right.
that like lives and breathes this principle.
Got it.
And their CEO, Sarah Patel, she has instituted something that they call Transparency Thursdays.
Interesting.
Okay, so imagine this. Every single week, she opens the books,
Wow.
shares the company's wins and losses, and addresses any challenges head on, all with full transparency to the entire team.
That's incredible. What's so fascinating about that kind of approach is that it directly addresses that communication breakdown that often plagues companies that are going through those periods of really rapid growth by creating a culture of openness. Leaders like Sarah, they're building trust and they're building alignment. And those two things are absolutely essential when you're navigating the uncertainties of a startup environment. And you know what? Radical transparency is just the tip of the iceberg. Leaders who scale, they actually outline 4 more like interconnected practices that together form this powerful framework for navigating uncertainty.
Okay, so what's the next piece of this leadership puzzle?
So the next practice they really emphasize is empowerment through structure, which might sound a bit counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But it's about striking that balance, that delicate balance between providing clear guidelines, right?
Okay.
And fostering autonomy within your team.
So it's not about micromanaging every little detail?
No, not at all. It's about creating a framework where everyone understands like what their roles are, their responsibilities, and those decision-making processes. And this empowers individuals to take ownership and make confident decisions, even when they're faced with ambiguity. And from a psychological standpoint, that sense of autonomy within a structured environment can be incredibly motivating.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? People really crave that sense of ownership, that sense of impact.
Oh, absolutely. And this ties directly back to navigating uncertainty. When individuals, they feel empowered within that clear framework, they're more likely to embrace challenges and adapt quickly to changing circumstances. It's about creating that sense of psychological safety amidst the storm, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. And this reminds me of something Mark Rodriguez from TechFlow talked about.
Yeah.
He mentioned that initially he was really hesitant to delegate and empower his team because he felt like he needed to control everything.
Right.
But once he made that shift, he was amazed by the surge in creativity and innovation.
I bet. It's such a common leadership hurdle.
Yeah.
But, his experience really speaks volumes about the power of this practice. And it nicely sets up the next practice that Leaders Who Scale highlights. which is cultivating a learning-first culture.
Yeah, this one really piqued my interest. What exactly does it mean to build a learning-first culture, especially in like a fast-paced startup environment where mistakes can feel really costly?
Yeah, totally. It's about shifting your perspective on failure. Instead of viewing mistakes as setbacks, they're embraced as valuable learning opportunities. The key is to normalize failure, encourage experimentation, and foster an environment where everyone feels safe, taking calculated risks.
Yeah, and leaders who scale, they specifically mention the importance of regular retrospectives, like really analyzing what went wrong, extracting those valuable lessons, and then using those insights to improve future decision-making.
Yes, exactly. And what's interesting is this ties back to that previous practice of empowerment through structure. Because by having those clear frameworks in place, it becomes easier to pinpoint the root causes of mistakes and really identify those areas for improvement. It's about creating that continuous feedback loop that drives both growth and innovation.
Makes sense. And Mark Rodriguez, he actually talked about how he implemented something they call post-mortem meetings at TechFlow.
Okay.
So whenever there's a significant setback or even a near miss, the team comes together, not to assign blame, but to really dissect what happened and identify ways to prevent similar situations from happening again in the future.
That's great. That is a fantastic example of a learning-first culture in action. And it also highlights how even experienced leaders like Mark, they've had to embrace a certain degree of vulnerability, right? And shift their mindsets to foster this type of environment.
It's inspiring, right? It shows that even seasoned entrepreneurs, they're constantly learning and adapting, which leads us to the next practice, cultivating an adaptive vision.
Yes. And this is where the ability to embrace uncertainty becomes absolutely critical. Leaders who scale found that successful founders, they don't just cling rigidly to their initial plans. They remain flexible and adjust their long-term goals as the landscape evolves.
So it's about being agile and responsive, right? Embracing that startup roller coaster instead of fearing it.
Precisely. It's about having that clear North Star, but being willing to navigate around obstacles and seize unexpected opportunities as they arise. And it's not just about the leader's vision, right? It's about bringing the entire team along on that journey of adaptation.
And that's where Sarah Patel and CloudCore come back into play. Remember how they prioritize radical transparency? Well, that same openness, it extends to their strategic planning. Sarah mentioned that some of their most successful pivots have actually come from frontline employees, those who are closest to the customer.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Those team members, they're often the first to spot emerging trends, customer pain points, and even potential opportunities that might not be as obvious from the top. And by creating a culture where those insights are valued and acted upon, leaders can tap into this wealth of collective intelligence and ensure that their vision remains aligned with the ever-changing market.
So we've talked about transparency, structure, a learning mindset, and an adaptive vision. It feels like we've covered a lot of ground. But there's still one piece missing from this leadership puzzle.
Absolutely, and it's a big one. Emotional intelligence.
Yeah, it seems like a given for any good leader, right?
You would think so, but it's often overlooked. Especially in the fast-paced, data-driven world of startups. And yet, leaders who scale found that emotional intelligence was a key differentiator among all those founders they interviewed.
So how did they define emotional intelligence within this context? What does it actually look like in practice?
Well, they emphasized the importance of empathy, self-awareness, and strong interpersonal skills. It's about being able to understand and connect with your team on a human level, not just as employees or colleagues.
And this is where those regular one-on-one check-ins that they talked about come into play, right?
Exactly.
It's not just about ticking off tasks on a to-do list. It's about creating space for genuine connection and open communication.
Exactly. It's about fostering a culture where people feel heard and valued and supported, especially during those times of uncertainty and rapid change. And it's not just about addressing challenges or concerns either. It's also about celebrating wins, both big and small, to maintain morale and motivation.
Leaders who scale, they made a point of emphasizing the importance of recognizing achievements and acknowledging the hard work of the team.
It's such a simple yet powerful act. By taking the time to celebrate successes, leaders can foster that sense of shared accomplishment, right?
Yeah.
And reinforce the idea that they're all in this together. And that sense of camaraderie can be so incredibly powerful when you're navigating that unpredictable terrain of startup growth.
It's like building this strong foundation of trust and connection. So when those inevitable storms hit, you're all weathering them together as like a united team.
Precisely. And that's the beauty of this whole leadership blueprint. Each practice, from transparency to emotional intelligence, they reinforce each other, creating this really robust framework for not just surviving, but thriving amidst uncertainty.
Yeah, it's amazing how these 5 practices we've been talking about, transparency, structure, a learning mindset, adaptive vision, and that emotional intelligence piece, it's like they all weave together to create this like really resilient leadership tapestry.
They do. They really do. It's not just a checklist of individual actions, right? It's about fostering a culture, a way of thinking that empowers, both individuals and the organization as a whole to navigate the unknown with confidence.
I love that. And the best part is leaders who scale, they didn't just leave us with this like really insightful framework. They actually provided some seriously practical steps to like help put these principles into action.
Yeah, they offered 3 like concrete action steps.
Okay.
That any leader, regardless of their level or experience, can implement. I love how they seamlessly connect back to those 5 key practices we've been discussing.
All right, so let's dive into these action steps. What's the first one?
The first step they recommend is establishing a daily stand-up ritual.
Okay.
Now, this might sound simple, even a bit mundane, but seriously, don't underestimate its impact, especially in those like really early stages of rapid growth.
Oh, it's not just about like ticking off tasks on a to-do list. There's a deeper purpose here, right?
Absolutely. It's about creating that vital rhythm of communication and alignment within the team.
Okay.
So imagine like a short, focused meeting, each day where everyone shares their top priorities, any potential roadblocks they foresee, and perhaps even a quick win from the previous day.
Yeah, I like that.
It's about fostering transparency, ensuring everyone's on the same page, and, identifying any potential bottlenecks early on.
Yeah, it's like this daily pulse check.
Exactly.
For the entire team. And it strikes me that this like really simple practice, it can be incredibly powerful in creating that sense of shared purpose, that shared accountability.
Precisely. And that sense of collective ownership is further amplified by the second action step, which is creating a leadership dashboard.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What exactly is a leadership dashboard and how does it fit into this framework?
So think of it as like this centralized hub of essential information.
Got it.
A clear snapshot of the company's health. It's about identifying those key performance indicators, those KPIs, that provide the most valuable insights into the business's progress.
So this could be anything from like sales and marketing data to product development milestones or even customer satisfaction scores, like whatever metrics are most critical for actually tracking progress toward the company's goals.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. Leaders who scale emphasizes that this dashboard shouldn't be hidden away in some like executive meeting room.
Right.
It should be accessible and transparent to the entire team.
This sounds a lot like Sarah Patel's approach at Cloud Core with their Transparency Thursdays.
Precisely. By openly sharing this data, even when it reveals areas for improvement, leaders are fostering trust, they're encouraging collaboration, and they're empowering their team to make more informed, data-driven decisions.
It's about shifting from that culture of secrecy or information hoarding to one of openness and shared accountability.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final action step, which I believe is the most powerful of all, scheduling your first transparency session.
Okay, this sounds a bit daunting, especially for those leaders who might not be used to operating with such a high degree of openness.
I understand that hesitation, but it doesn't have to be this grand, intimidating event.
Right.
It can start small.
Okay.
It could be a department meeting where you openly discuss challenges and brainstorm solutions as a team, or it could be as simple as having a candid conversation with a colleague about a difficult project.
Yeah.
It's about taking that first step, however small, towards fostering a culture of open communication.
It's about creating that safe space.
Yes.
For honest dialogue.
Right.
Where vulnerabilities are embraced and feedback is viewed as a gift.
100%.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into leading through uncertainty, I'm struck by how deceptively simple yet profound these insights really are. It's not about having all the answers.
Right.
It's about cultivating a mindset, a culture that embraces uncertainty, right?
Yes.
As this catalyst for growth and innovation.
Well said. And remember, this journey, it begins with a single step. Yeah. So, what resonated most with you today? Which practice or action step feels, most relevant to your own leadership journey? Take a moment to reflect on that and consider how you might incorporate these insights into your own sphere of influence.